I'm starting to see more people talking about plans for remigration, mass repatriation. I think that's a really good thing. I think if there's one thing we can do at the moment, whilst there is relatively little progress, it is to think through what we will do once the situation arises. I think the more we think it through, the more likely we are to do it successfully and without atrocity, without a lot of bloodshed, and to be able to do it reasonably humanely. I think those are the two aims: to do it successfully and to do it reasonably humanely. And that depends on thinking it out, planning it out. And I'm glad that people are doing that. I'm glad that we're starting to think through the stages of it. I think Steve Laws has his 7-point plan. And in general, what I want to do is to respond to these the plans that people are putting forward, and to respond in particular to the general tone of them, because I think they depend upon the existence of a state. I think they are statist methods. They rely upon the democratic vote putting in a state authority that will carry out this and this measure. And my view is that we're not going to vote our way out of this situation. We are going to collapse our way out of this situation. What I want to look at in particular is two things. First of all, I want to look at reform. Reform are described as they are the great white hope for the patriotic vote, or the nationalist vote. I think Mark Collett has said quite rightly, that they are going to occupy the whole space for the next 5 years, the whole space of nationalist patriotic politics, such as Reform are. They're going to dominate that space. They're going to take up all of that space. And the second thing I want to look at is a report from the Office for Budget Responsibility, because I think, and the way that's been responded to in the press, because I think that shows the assumptions on which the apparatus of the state bases itself. So what I want to do, if I can begin by looking at Nigel Farage, I'd like to start by I want to look at 3 interviews he's done, short interviews. I want to start by looking at an interview that he did with Sky News. So if you bear with me. So this is the interview that Nigel Farage did with Sky News. Nigel Farage, it's possible I could become Prime Minister. Yeah, I think that is possible, actually. I'll talk about why I quite like that in a minute. But let me play a short clip from this interview.
Would you be comfortable living in a majority non-white country?
Well, if I lived in Birmingham, I'd be there already, wouldn't I? And we are in Birmingham.
But you don't like that, though?
Look, what I said very clearly out there on the stage earlier is we as a party couldn't care less what colour you are. We couldn't care less what your personal private preferences are. We're not in the least bit interested. We view everybody equally, and I loathe the way in society we're all being divided and put into different categories.
Okay, so that's pretty colourblind. He doesn't want division. He wants everyone to be united. Doesn't matter what colour you are, where you're coming from. So I think we can say he's not a nationalist. Now, a lot of people, I think, try to sense some ambivalence when he makes statements like that, when he says, well, I would be living in a minority white country if I lived in Birmingham, and that's where we're having our conference, so I would be okay with it, kind of hedging his bets. I don't think there is any ambivalence there. I think he really believes that stuff. He's made his choice. He wants to be on the inside. He wants to be mainstream. He likes it there. He likes the people he deals with. I think he particularly likes the money, and that's where he wants to stay. He just doesn't want to deal with ugly nationalist politics. So I don't think there are any grounds for pathetic hope that maybe he's on our side after all. I just don't think he is. If I go to, and I think you can see this from this GB News interview. You may have seen this. It's done the rounds a bit on Twitter. I'll just play a bit of it now.
Do you think that immigration represents a major threat to Britain from a demographic perspective? So in the last 20 years, the white British population has declined from 87% to 74%. Is that a concern of yours?
No, that's not a concern of mine. What is a concern of mine is, in many cases, the lack of integration. We see that writ large by the new kind of politics that's emerging, sectarian voting along religious lines. I never really thought I'd see that in England in my lifetime. I mean, I grew up seeing what it did in Northern Ireland, and it's not very welcome. No, I think the real problem is this.
So he's just not concerned about numbers. I think if he's not concerned about numbers, he's not concerned about us becoming a minority in our own land. He's not concerned with a sense of a nation. Really, he would claim to be concerned with a sense of a nation, but I don't think he can be. I don't think he's on our side. I don't think he would have any truck with any ideas about repatriation or remigration. So that is Nigel Farage. Just if that's the great white hope, there is no hope. And you notice what he focuses on are things that he has no one has any power to deal with. He's talking about integration. How is he going to get people who don't want to integrate to integrate? You can't do that. Every nice method has been tried. It has failed. There's no way he can do it just by being a windbag. That is not going to change things. This is a common vice, a conceit that politicians tend to have. When Blair had it in spades, this idea, only I can fix this. Only I have the miraculous personal qualities to talk the hind leg off a donkey and get to achieve the impossible by talking people into doing something that they are just determined not to do. I can do it through the force of my personality and the way I use words. When someone does that, that actually means when someone tries to make you believe that, what that says is they've got nothing, they have nothing to offer, they can't accomplish it, they're only going to be destructive. And the other thing he goes on about is sectarian politics. He thought he would never see them in his lifetime. Well, foreign religions are very sectarian, and not just Islam, and they need to be. He is not going to get rid of sectarianism. The whole point of those religions, particularly Islam, but other religions as well, is to be sectarian. He's not going to undo thousands of years of religious history. He certainly offers no plan for that, and if race and ethnicity underlie culture and religion in any event, then he's not even going to touch on that issue. I don't think he has any hope of succeeding, but he seems to have this conceit and attitude that he has these special personal qualities, and I think that means he will do harm. I think the reality is he likes being on the inside. He likes being part of the mainstream. He's tailoring what he says and does to that. And the way he would put it, what he would say is, well, I'm keeping myself on the public platform. I'm keeping the microphone in my mouth so that I can put forward the message for you. If I'm not able to, if I get myself cancelled, I'm not able to put forward a message at all. I think that's what he's saying. And again, it all comes back to this idea that if he's not able to do it, no one can do it. And he has these special qualities to be able to do it. And I think he's not staying in the public eye in order to be able to put forward the right message. He is tailoring and massaging his message in order to be able to stay in the public eye. So it's circular, it's self-referential. He's staying in the public eye in order to be able to stay in the public eye. And I think that's because he likes it there. He likes being on the inside. He likes being inside the palace where he is right now. And I think in particular he likes the money making. And what I want to do is to refer to a One News article here. If you give me a second. Now this one here, you might have seen this. Farage earns more than £1 million a year for non-MP work. Nigel Farage has revealed he is earning well over £1 million a year from work he does outside Parliament in addition to his job as an MP. It is thought his outside income is significantly higher than that of any other member of Parliament, and it says he got 1.2 million from doing GB News. Now I think most people, they don't mind other people making money. Sometimes they don't necessarily mind a politician making money. I think what people object to is politicians, particularly sitting politicians, making money off the fact that they are a political figure, making money off the fact that they are a politician. And I think that is why Nigel Farage makes money. I find that sleazy. Blair and Clinton, they were masters at that. And they're really, people detest that about them, the huge sums of money that they're making. And Nigel Farage seems to be following in those footprints. Money talks with nearly all of us. It talks with me. I'm sure it talks with Nigel Farage. I find that kind of, the word is sleazy. I find that sleazy because if you're doing that, are you bought and paid for? Are you tailoring your message in order to be able to stay in the public eye. So you can make those kind of sums. And thirdly, I want to look at a clip from the first half of this quick interview with the BBC, because I think it shows some of his unpleasant personal qualities.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, the last 8-10 days of a general election were dominated by, at best, loopy, and at worst, extremely racist candidates. And that was because the party wasn't professionalised, there wasn't proper vetting. It did us enormous harm, and probably in retrospect, rightly so.
What you get with him is these silly faces he pulls, these unnecessary intensifiers and excessive emphasis that he uses. And that's characteristic of when someone does that, it's a substitute for substance. It usually means it's a substitute for meaning that they don't really have anything to say, so they're going to bang on a bit harder and try and push their meaning home, but by silly faces like this. And you also see it in the sort of the drink-sodden, nicotine-soiled, blimpish vocabulary that he uses. So he'll tend to begin every phrase with things like phrases like "look" and "simple as," and "you've got a box clever," and "I want to be perfectly clear about this." That kind of language that I think is supposed to come across as bluff and straight talking, but actually just comes across as a bit hollow and a little bit seedy to my eye. I don't think this is the person who's going to solve the problems. I don't think he's going to face up to the reality of the problems. I think actually, judging from his earnings, I think he enjoys cashing in on his political profile, and that is not a good basis for effective political action. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I think he's a hate figure. I think he's not up to the job. I think he won't face the reality of the task. I think he can't do it. And my point is, if he and his party are the great white hope for the next 5 years, there is no hope for the next 5 years. And just to show, I would like to see him become Prime Minister. He's saying he could. I think he could. I actually would quite like to see it, because I think he is the one most likely to collapse the system. I would see him as a Gorbachev figure. So Gorbachev, who crashed the Soviet Union as a result of his economic incompetence. I think Farage is the one who will do that. I can see him, if he got voted into power, he would do it on the back of what he would say is a bold programme. We're going to solve these policies, we're going to solve these problems. And I think he would try and subsume policies of lack of integration and sectarianism. He would try to subsume them within the economic problems, trying to say it's a lack of opportunity. What you need to do is provide abundant opportunity for populations, foreigners who don't want to integrate, don't have anything in common with us and don't want it. He'll say that by providing opportunity, he's going to achieve it. And I think to do that, he'll have to do that through some form of quantitative easing, either through money printing or through mass immigration, quantitative easing with people, which is quite ironic. I suspect it wouldn't be mass immigration. It would be through massive money printing. And I think he would be the reformer who crashes the system, which is always the way. And I think I'm supported in this by Reform's manifesto at the last election. They put forward, I think, 90 billion pounds worth of tax cuts and 50 billion pounds worth of spending increases, none of which was costed. And that's been picked apart in The Spectator quite well. I don't deal with their story here, but that shows the level of, I think, financial, they would say boldness, I would say irresponsibility. I think that is in our interest if we have a government like that, because I think that the sooner the system starts to break down, I think that is probably for the better. But I'm not going to do anything to cause it to break down. I can't. But I think if a government comes into place that can do that, I think that is probably in the interests of society and humanity generally. Okay, and it's not just Nigel Farage, it is that whole party system. And it runs throughout the party. And Nigel Farage is basically saying we're going to become more professional in order to get rid of racist candidates. And this is what they did at the last election. This article in The Guardian, Reform UK forced to remove more than 100 general election candidates in 2024. And I think what it's hinting, it says that they got rid of more than a dozen of whom were sacked after offensive and racist comments were revealed. And I think they're hinting that maybe it was more than a dozen, maybe a few more out of that more than 100 people were fired for being racist. And the Spectator went into a bit more detail. The 10 candidates dropped by reform. And I think the first one that they dealt with, or if I go down here, it's a fella called, if you bear with me, a fella called this, just to give you an example of the kind of person they dropped. This fella, Jonathan Kay, who was the party's South Ribble candidate, was dropped by the party after remarks he had made online in 2019, so 5 years before it came to light. He had claimed 5 years before that Africans had IQs among the lowest in the world. Well, I think that's borne out by the data, and Muslims never coexist with others. Well, that's borne out by what we see around the world now, and by history, and by doctrine. So he was fired for telling the truth. And the next one, I think, is Benjamin, our very own Bo Dade, who you might have seen on Lotus Eaters. I think he's the best guy on Lotus Eaters. I like him. He's always worth a watch. And he was formerly Reform's candidate for South Swindon. And he said an article that he wrote in 2022, so 2 years previously, he'd said that Britain should rid itself of the foreign plague we have been diseased with. And he called for millions of foreigners and their dependents to be removed from the country. And the Spectator didn't like that. It says sarcastically, lovely. These people are being fired for telling the truth. And I think the final one is, if you bear with me, this fella called Nick Davis. Well, I missed him. Yeah. And he was for the candidate for North East Bedfordshire, and he resigned after the party spoke to him about the content of his social media. Again, people getting fired for tweets. In one of them, he had a picture of Sadiq Khan and Adolf Hitler with the text, "Evil doesn't die, it reinvents itself." So basically he was saying that Sadiq Khan and Adolf Hitler are evil. So if this is the way, and I think it is, the only way that we're going to see the rise of any patriotic or nationalist politics, it's not going to rise. Even if it did, I think it's a stretch to see a really tough, fire-breathing, remigrating government getting voted into power with the thumping majority, the thumping mandate it would need in order to carry out thoroughgoing, pervasive repatriation. In January 2021, so nearly 4 years ago, the white British portion of the population was, according to the government, whether you can trust their figures, 77%. Now, since then, we've had, I would say, roughly 3 million people come in to Britain from outside the EU. That's 5% of the population. I would say that probably puts the white British percentage of the population down to maybe 72, 73%, something like 73%, and falling. So that matters if you want to see a solution come around by voting in the democratic state, because the lower the portion of white British, the higher the proportion of those white British who have to vote for that fire-breathing, remigrating government, unless you assume that foreigners in this country will vote to get forced out and kicked out, or unless you think they will vote to have their voting rights denied. And I just don't think that's going to happen. And if we get passed down to the 60% mark, where white British is 60% or less, I think it's impossible to see any government being given the kind of mandate it would need to carry out widespread repatriation. And now the second thing is, Are we going to vote for it in sufficient numbers? At the last election, if reform are the great hope, at the last election 14% of votes cast were for reform. They got about 4.1 million votes. And the reform were seen as radical. The one or two people who I know who joined reform were very proud of it and felt they were really taking the plunge in doing so. So I find there's no sign yet that we're going to have this massive landslide victory for a remigration government. And finally, are we the public going to vote for that? To vote in a remigrating government on a landslide ticket, we would have to vote for remigration. We'd have to put before welfare. We would have to put civilization ahead of welfare and government management of the economy, which is what I think we tend to vote for. We want to keep the welfare state going at all costs, and that is going to be the priority. And if we're focused on that, you're not going to have that single-minded focus on remigration. I think we'll have a focus on the opposite, because I think welfare rights, they're based on human rights universalism, in the same way that multicultural rights and migration rights are based on human rights universalism. Now, I think you can see that we still are very much focused on, there is no hint, I see no sign that we're losing our focus on our welfare entitlements. Quite the opposite. If you compare the lack of public outcry, the relative lack of public outcry about the way the legal system was bent, legal procedure was bent in order to impose severe sentences on the Southport rioters, if you compare the lack of attention that we have paid to that, to the huge attention we have paid to the means testing of the winter fuel allowance, which I think that comes to about 450 quid a year for people who get it, and now it's going to be means tested instead of given to every pensioner, then, well, if you compare that, I think there's no question that we are still very much focused on, preoccupied with welfare entitlement, and that takes the focus away from voting for remigration. I just don't see us doing it. If we get down to a figure anywhere approaching, where white Brits are anything approaching, not 50%, but 60% of the total population, then I would say something like 80 or 90% of those white Brits are going to have to vote purely for remigration. And I just don't think we're going to get it together to do that. Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying remigration won't happen. I think it will. I don't think it's going to happen via the state, by democratically voting in a new state authority. Okay, so now what I want to look at is a couple of Daily Telegraph articles that deal with a report from the Office for Budget Responsibility. So if you bear with me. Now, low-skilled migrants cost taxpayers £150,000 each. Pressure on public services outweighs tax take for low earners, finds the OBR. The OBR, they're supposed to be a watchdog. They're supposed to keep the government financially responsible. I think they're probably an excuse for the government they're offloading their duty of responsibility. So they can say, well, the Office for Budget Responsibility, they've okayed it, then it's okay. We don't have to justify it any further. I think that's what it is. I think it's, if anything, it contributes to, in the long term, it will contribute to budget irresponsibility. But anyway, here they are saying low-paid migrant workers are an immediate drain on the public purse, costing taxpayers more than £150,000 each by the time they hit state pension age, according to the government's tax and spending watchdog. So that's just when they retire, when they hit 67 state pension age, that's what they cost by that time. Now, the Office for Budget Responsibility said the average low earner who came to Britain aged 25, so what they're saying is he's been born, raised, clothed, fed, educated and trained, brought up in another country. They've borne all those costs. As soon as he gets productive, he comes over to Britain and works. Then, and now, well, I'll deal with the sustainability of that in a minute. But the cumulative bill rose to an estimated 151,000 by the time they could claim the state pension at 66. So by the time they hit 66, 40 years later, 41 years later, then they've cost that much money. And what they say is that this is because low-paid migrants, who the OBR assumes earn half the average wage. So the average wage, I think, is about £42,000. The midpoint for wages is about £35,000. So you're talking somewhere between about £17,000 and £20,000. And I want to go to the next story, so bear with me. Hold on, what I want to do now, if I go down, now if you look at this, if you go to this this report, I think it's behind a paywall, so it might be a problem to look at it. But what they've got is a graph here. Now that blue line there, that is, you see the zero line going there? Well, that blue line there, that's what an ordinary Brit earning an average wage costs. So from 0 up to 25, they're costing more and more and more. And then when they hit 25, start working very productively, then they start putting money back into the system, and until they get to retirement age, and then they start taking money out of the system again. If you can see that, that's that blue line. What you have then is that that line there, that black line, that is a low-paid migrant, comes in at 25. He's always costing money all the time, and basically doesn't contribute. And then you have the average earner. He contributes up until he retires, and until after he retires, according to the OBR, and then he starts taking money, government money out. And then a high earner, that guy is basically always contributing according to the OBR. You might think, well, we just pinch out a few low earners, don't have them in, and then everything's great, we're taking money. No, wrong answer. If I move to this next article from the Telegraph, I think this one came a day later. Britain will pay for the costs of low-skilled migration for a generation. OBR data suggests the post-Brexit wage of low-wage migrants will greatly strain the public purse. And if I move down a bit, then bear with me again. Now, in this article, a recent Centre for Policy Studies report looked at how many visas were being issued in 22 to 23 for different job types on skilled worker routes and compared them with the salary data for these occupations. So what the Telegraph are doing is taking that Office for Budget Responsibilities figures and then applying those other figures from the Centre for Policy Studies. And this analysis suggests that around 72% were likely to be earning less than the average UK salary. So that's nearly 3/4 are below average, and fully 54% were probably on just half the average salary. So that's the low wage earners, half the average salary. Those are low wage earners for the purposes of the Office for Budget Responsibility. So they're a permanent drain. They cost 151,000 before they retire. So 54% on just half the average salary. The OBR's low wage migrant, given another chunk, will likely around the 40% of the average salary. It appears that roughly 3/5 of workers on skilled worker visas are destined to be net recipients. So basically what it says, by the age of 81, for every £1 contributed to the government in tax by the high wage migrant group, the larger low wage migrant group would have taken out £1.60. Now I've got three points there, and the first one is, what the hell do the government think they're doing? This enhances my view that mass immigration is not about increasing the prosperity of this country. It's not about, certainly not about increasing government prosperity or improving services. Obviously it doesn't. It's a net drain. It's not about making people more prosperous. It is about the opposite. It is about impoverishing us. It is about grinding us down. It is about diluting our wages. It is about increasing people's capital expenses. So basically the grunts cost less and the grits cost more. It's about denying us a sense of identity. It's about degrading our neighbourhoods and our sense of identity, because that makes us easier to rule. It is deliberate. The bad things that come about with mass immigration. They are not some unfortunate byproducts of well-intended policies. Those are the policies. That is the intention of the policy. That is what I think the government is doing. And it's what I find strange here is this idea that bringing in more people makes us richer. No, again, wrong answer. Any infant school child understands that. So if you imagine a class of 30 infants, a class of 30 infant school children, each have one apple, and the teacher says, well, do you like apples, children? Would you like to have more apples? And the children will say yes. And then if the teacher says, great, I'm going to bring in another class of 30 children, each of them will have an apple, so you'll have more apples. Those infant school children, they'll understand immediately, no, that doesn't work. We're not going to have any more apples. It's of no benefit to us. And they would protest pretty loudly about it. But for some reason, we're being sold this idea that bringing more people in makes us wealthier. So the question is, what are the government doing? I think this goes to, the point I'm making is this goes to the whole nature of the system, not just the political figureheads. It's the way the state works, the apparatus, the civil service, the intellectual class, the economists. The whole system is not going to countenance the necessary solutions that we need to see. That has to be turned around again, and for that you would need a huge thumping great majority in Parliament, and I just don't think we're going to see that. Now the second question I've got is, what is the OBR doing, the Office for Budget Responsibility? I think it fails even on its own terms. If I go back to this graph here, what it shows is people coming in, foreigners, invaders coming in at age 25, and then we make a profit out of them, more profit from them. So that average worker there, he makes more than the average Brit on the blue line there, simply because he has been born, fed, clothed, educated and trained in a foreign country. And even on its own terms, that fails. Ethically, I don't need to talk about the ethics. If we expect poor countries to bear the costs of creating and training, bringing up and training the workforce that is going to come to Britain, there's no decency about that. There's no ethical, there's no budget responsibility about that. That's just plain unethical. And on its own terms, it is completely unsustainable. You can't rely on poor countries to pay to train your workforce. And if you rely on that, if you weave that into your own figures, you have to keep doing that year after year, and that is unsustainable. It's at best, it's a little financial one-off, but that is something that the Office for Budget Responsibility should be looking at. They're not. And I think I can sum that up in a quote that came from, that was in that article. I'll just read it out here. David Miles of an OBR official said, "I think the characteristics of migrants in terms of their earnings and how long they stay are important, if not more important than the absolute numbers." No one is paying any attention, paying any mind to the wider issue here. That analysis, I think, fails on its own terms. And finally, while the Daily Telegraph are doing this, they appear to be doing anything to avoid naming the invasion for what it is, and they only feel comfortable putting it in dry numbers terms, financial terms. And I think they're doing that in part because they want to cater to their readers. They don't want to scare their readership. They don't want to get a bad reputation. They don't want people cancelling their subscriptions. I think that's what that's about. Again, that goes sort of even deeper into the intellectual class of the state. The sort of, I think, is it called the fourth estate, the press, and turning that around is just going to be very hard. I don't think we are going to vote our way out of that. We are not yet voting in sufficient numbers to be able to reverse the problems. And with every year that passes, so that the white British portion of the population get lower and lower and lower. I think it's going to be harder and harder to get up that kind of majority, and it's going to be at least another 5 years if Reform dominate that space, as I think people are right to say that Reform are going to do. As I'll say it again, I don't think we're going to vote our way out of this situation. I think we're going to collapse our way out of this situation. I think we will get out of this situation, but I think we will do it primarily because of collapse, which I think is much more likely. And here I want to just I want to say how I think it will happen. Before I do so, I think there are people, people to the extent that people are kind enough to listen to what I say, I think people misconstrue it. I think people say, one thing that people think I'm saying is that when the state collapses, suddenly all these foreigners and invaders will say, well, the government's broken down, we'd better go back to Somalia, Pakistan or Afghanistan. No, they're not going to do that, partly because the governments are permanently broken down in their home countries anyway. And another misconception about what I'm saying is people say that I'm saying that when the welfare state breaks down, that suddenly all those foreigners and invaders will say, well, no more welfare freebies for me, I'm going back to Somalia, I'm going back to Afghanistan, Pakistan or India, where my wages are in India, it's about 1/20th of the average wage here. In Pakistan, I think it's about 1/35th of the average wage here. And in Afghanistan and Somalia, it's about 1/75th. So your wages here are about 75 times higher here than they would be in somewhere like Somalia or Afghanistan. So people, those foreigners and invaders are not going to repatriate themselves simply because the welfare state breaks down. I think it involves more than that, but I think the steps are likely to happen. What I think is likely to happen is much more. I think it is much more likely that we will see the welfare state breaking down than that we will see that we will vote in large enough numbers to give us a thumping great majority in Parliament, or to give a remigrating government a thumping great majority in Parliament. I think we are going to see the economic situation and state finances getting worse and worse, particularly under the Labour government. I don't think their tax plans are going to bail them out. I think they'll be counterproductive, if anything. And as the government's finances get worse and worse, they're going to have to cut welfare spending because they won't be able to borrow more. They'll have a Liz Truss moment if they try to, so they're just going to have to cut spending. As the welfare state starts no longer to pay out, I think the fear and panic and public anger that generates will reduce the authority of the government. And then I think that will in turn reduce the government's ability to make ends meet. It will reduce its finances further, its ability to collect taxes. So you get into a kind of a doom loop where government can't pay for welfare. The public get angry. We start to feel like the sky is falling in on our heads because the welfare nose tube gets ripped out of our heads, and then we riot. We stop giving authority to the government because we see no reason to give authority to the government. So basically, that's how I think the welfare state going down will mean that the authority of the state itself, its law-making power, goes down. If the state authority goes down, I think that is simply where we are historically, if you like. I think we are at the preface before the introduction, before the beginning of the end of the age of the state, the very early lead-in to the start of the end of the age of the state. I think that's simply the way history is going. State authorities I think they are defunct, but I think they're certainly becoming defunct. They will become defunct. If the state authority goes down, crucially, what will happen when the state authority goes down? We get scared. Crime rockets, and we need to protect our security. If the state can't provide for our security because the state has gone, I think we will have to provide for our own security ourselves. I think we will only be willing to do that by clubbing together with people who look, think, act and behave and speak like we do, because we will only trust our security. We'll only be willing to cooperate with people on security issues with people who we can trust to act and think and talk like us. And so if that happens, I think we will see the existing ethnic and racial separation become much harder and much more clearly defined. And the big if then, if we can then maintain law in our own English areas, I think we will be able to maintain our own prosperity. I think in the foreigner enclaves, very congested, very poverty-stricken, they will become unlivable fast, without any means of civil society, without any means of government, without any means of law and order, without basic services like healthcare, fire services or police services, without basic amenities like the telephone service, or without essential services like gas, electricity, water or waste collection or sewage collection. I think those areas, and they'll become like that because not only is the welfare state denied to them, they're denied the ability to trade and to interact with the prosperous English, Western people. We are a productive people. I think in general they are not, and they will not be able, and once they're cut off from us, I think that the conditions in their congested enclaves will go down fast and become unlivable fast. And then I think it becomes realistic for them to say to themselves, well, we might as well go back to our homelands because conditions there, at least we can survive there, which we can't do here in these cut off, poverty-stricken, disease-ridden enclaves. That is the way. I think that is much more likely, that process of collapse and separation and the plummeting of conditions in foreigner enclaves. I think that is much more likely to happen than that we are going to vote our way out of this problem. I think collapse is more likely. I'll say it again. I don't think we're going to vote our way out of this situation. I think we are going to collapse our way out of this situation. Thank you.